I serve as the Province 1 lead for the Becoming Beloved Community ministry for the province, and I represent the province on the Executive Council Committee on Anti-Racism and Racial Reconciliation, where I actually serve as chair of that committee. And so I'm just so pleased to welcome you all here and to have this discussion about what we are doing in our diocese on the topic of reparations. And we have some dioceses across the church who have been doing some wonderful things, and dioceses in our own province have been doing some wonderful things. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to share what is going on and provide other dioceses who are not quite doing anything yet to ask questions and to be in conversation as we look throughout the province at what we might do around reparations. So if that's what you're here to talk about, you're in the right place, I guess is a way of saying that. So let us start with opening prayer. And we have been blessed to have Bishop Doug agree to lead us in opening prayer. So Bishop Doug, over to you.
Sure. Let us pray. Living God, we thank you for the ministry of our beloved community. We thank you for already the great insights that they've given us, the path that they've shown us. Living God, we know that you set your people free from slavery in Egypt. And we ask that you be with us as we wrestle with the legacy of slavery in the United States. In this meeting today and in the meetings to come, send us your wisdom, send us courage, and send us the moral imagination that we need to do that which is right and good and holy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop Doug. So what we have here is an agenda where we wanted to allow those dioceses who have been working on reparations to take about 10 minutes and share with us your process, the process that you went through in identifying the work that you're doing, where you are now in that process, and just reflect, if you would, and share with us the things you think you got right, and I like to call it pluses and deltas. So what you got right and what you might do differently if you had the chance, given what you know now. Right, so just a time for sharing for those who have been doing reparations work. And so we'll do that until about 3:55 or so. And at 3:55, then we will open it up for questions from the floor for any of the folks who have spoken. And then at about 4:25, we're going to shift questions to asking you for some input as to what future conversations around reparations should we have as a province, and whom should we invite to the party who may not be here. So we'll have that conversation for about 10 minutes, and then we'll do a roundtable of what's happening in our diocese, in each diocese, to share. And hopefully we'll gather some of that information, those events, and make sure we get them on the province newsletter. We'll be able to put things into the newsletter, into our calendar, and then we'll have a closing prayer from Bishop Shannon. So that is our agenda for the time. So I'd love to start with who's working on reparations, who's been actually doing work on reparations, which dioceses have been doing work on reparations. We know Massachusetts has, and I know we in New Hampshire have, but anyone else, just so we have a sense of who we should be calling on? So Don? And you're on mute, Don.
Episcopal Church in Connecticut has a task force on reparations that we've been working on now for about a couple of years.
Okay, all right. Good. Anyone else? We've got Western, so Bishop Doug?
Yeah, we've got a resolution in front of our convention for October about reparations. And so, so we're still pretty early on in this work, but we're committed to doing a lot of work leading to convention so that people will vote for the resolution and we can move forward with reparations.
Okay, great. So, Betty, see your hand up?
The Diocese of New Hampshire passed a resolution, I believe it was 2019 or 2020, that said we wanted to work on reparations and that we urged parishes to do some study in preparation for this. And we had a good response. We had a number of parishes, and the diocese did work on Sacred Ground, Be the Bridge, and several other things like that. And we're currently preparing a resolution to move us forward to do more active work. And we're in the process, the Reconciliation Commission that James and I are on is in the process of putting together a resolution for this year's diocesan convention that will put some more action steps. And James, please feel free to elaborate.
So yeah, we've got a lot of things that we've been thinking about in the process. So we'll get to the process in a minute as well. And I see Reverend Joyce has a hand up.
Yes, here in the Diocese of Rhode Island, they have the Center of Reconciliation, which has been going on for was going on for several years, and then it stopped and it started back up again. But the church I belong to is actually, and several other, a couple of other churches along with us are doing our own thing on anti-racism and reconciliation.
So Joyce, let's stick with you for a minute. So what was the process that you went through to come up with that work that you're now doing?
Actually, what happened was I was on the Diocesan Council, and they had set up certain things that they wanted to do. And one of the things was anti-racism. And I raised my hand and said I would do it. And a couple of other people on the Diocesan Council decided to work with me. And I was able to get the priest from the church that I go to and one of the other parishioners to work with us on this, on anti-racism. And we've been doing this for the past 3 years now, working on it ourselves, trying to get things within our parishes and setting an example so that other parishes will follow through with regards to anti-racism.
So that's great. And so we're, the anti-racism piece is so important. And of course we need that. We also need to expand to focus on the reparations notion. And I suppose one of the things that we probably should have started off with, what is reparations, right? There's so many folks who use that term and they think it's anti-racism work, or they think it's strictly monetary payments to people of color. And it's so much more than that. And it's about, it's almost like the repair the breach pillar of becoming beloved community. We're repairing broken relationships, and money is one of those ways that we can repair broken relationships, but it's not the only way that we repair broken relationships. And it's also about ensuring that when the repair is done, the injury isn't redone. Right? So it's about change of systems and attitudes. So that's what would really love to hear where folks are with that broader notion of reparations overall, of which anti-racism is a piece of. And I see Byron Retired has his hand up.
Yes, can you hear me? I can.
Yes.
Okay. I would not like to do that, right? I want to stay on what people are doing right now. If what they're doing is trying to figure out what reparations is, that's okay. I don't want to get into that discussion now. I think that's a completely separate discussion for those of us who are working on reparations. So I want to sort of stay on the agenda and get through what people around the province are doing right now. So that's what and I'll tell you about Massachusetts. Massachusetts started, the first resolution on reparations was passed when Tom Shaw was bishop, and then nothing happened. And then a number of people got together to talk about why had nothing happened, and why had we allowed a resolution to go through, and then there was absolutely no follow-up on it. And then about 3 years ago, I think Connie is on. She might be better on our than I am on the actual times. A group came together to revitalize that resolution and to pass another resolution, which did pass. And then and then the final thing we did was to decide that it is money. Yes, it is money. And if it is money, then what is the Diocese of Massachusetts share? We don't know. And how would it be spent? We don't know. But you can't talk about it before you don't have money on the plate. And so we have put the money on the plate. It's not much. If it all works out in 5 years, we'll have about $11 million sitting in a fund for this work. But we've pretty much made the decision that we're not sure when you can make, when you will have a group of people that are anti-racist enough that they could make a decision about what the money should be spent on. And so, but the most important thing is to say, we are working to get there. And we felt that the first thing you had to do was get people to tell their own story, the stories of their congregations and racism, and for the 13 in Massachusetts who still exist, who are Church of England congregations that still exist, to tell their own particular history during our period of slavery, and then deal with the issues of how do you do it and what is it, right? And we have gotten already into a mix that I have found around the country of calling everything reparations, which is absolutely wrong, and calling reparations reconciliation, which I don't think is correct. And I think we should, when we talk about reparations, we should start by talking about money and then follow that with other things you should do.
Thank you, Byron. I see Connie has a hand raised, and I suspect she's looking to amplify and add on to what you just said, Byron. So Connie, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Connie Holmes, and I'm from Church of the Good Shepherd in Watertown. And I've been involved in this reparations work for several years. I was part of a leadership team of Sacred Ground at my parish, and we actually added a module to Sacred Ground on reparations, which I wish had been more universally accepted, but we added a discussion about reparations. And then I became involved with the Reparations Community of Practice, which Byron was instrumental in establishing, and that started just about the beginning of the pandemic. Isn't that right, Byron? I think it was. It was like in February of 2020 or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yes.
over this period of time from February 2020 till now, where we're in April 2023, the reparations community of practice collected 17 presentations, which are available on our website, churchreparations.org. Search church_reparations.org. church_reparations.org. 17 presentations. And I think Byron would agree with me, excellent presentations, which looked into the history, into the genealogy of different churches in the Diocese of Massachusetts, different Episcopal churches, but also several from the Diocese of Connecticut. And then we had a few speakers from church_reparations, Will. So we also had a couple of presentations from national organizations. And then I did 2 presentations on the Shoah and reparations toward the end. So we now have these 17 presentations, which are high quality in our opinion, and in the opinion of the diocese, available on our website for educational purposes. And we're also keeping open a listserv so people can continue communicating about what their reparations activities are. So, and then as an outgrowth of the reparations community of practice, which at its heyday probably had 40 people participating, we now have a reparations interfaith coalition, because it has been our opinion, and our opinion has come out of the work of William Darity, and we were fortunate enough to invite William Darity and Kirsten Mullen to present to our group on their view of what reparations is and who should be responsible for reparations and what sort of money are we talking about. And that presentation also is on our website, church_reparations.org. We had a big turnout for that, 200 people. But one of the points that Darity and Mullen made, which was a powerful point, is that there need to be coalitions. If we're going to establish enough of a base of energy and investment and involvement to further the course of to further the cause of national reparations, we have to build coalitions. So we're doing that. Byron and I are collaborating in creating the reparations interfaith coalition, in which we have joined with the Jewish Boston Workers Circle and the Jewish community of Amherst. And we're looking for a joint program, including Reparations Sabbath, and also the promotion of an excellent course called the Stolen Beam, which has been developed by the Jewish community of Amherst. So I've been involved in these things, and as Byron knows, but you don't, I come from a family where my mother received reparations. She was a refugee Jewish refugee from Vienna. So she received reparations. I've grown up with reparations. Reparations are in my DNA. So I'm glad to be here today and participate in this conversation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Connie. So interesting things going on. I like the notion of the community of practice, and that's an idea that might be worth replicating in other places. So Connie mentioned Connecticut. So Don, would you love to just share a bit what's going on there, what you're doing, what you did right, what you would do differently based on where you are now?
Thank you, James. My name is Don Hamer, and I'm co-convener of our task force on reparations. Our first official work that I remember recently was in 2018. Our convention passed a resolution that was a 2-year season of racial healing, hope, and reconciliation, I believe it was. And during that 2 years, we had a network that was established of folks interested in this work. which is still vibrant and very much helping moving us forward in the state of Connecticut. And then we knew 2 years was not going to be enough, given particularly our history. And so in 2020, there was a second resolution, which was much broader in scope and much more specific. And without going through the whole thing, it laid up a bunch of expectations for training of vestries and anybody who had an elected or appointed diocesan position to receive special training in racial healing, justice, and reconciliation. It added an addendum to our annual parochial report, which I think we're now about to abandon now that it's in the tech parochial report, but report on what your congregation has done in the past year in terms of moving the needle forward on racial healing, justice, and reconciliation. And it also invited the bishops to appoint a task force on reparations. And so that was the establishment of that task force. We were finally appointed, I think, in April of that year of 21. And as I said, it's 12 people that were appointed by the Ian Douglas, our then bishop, and Bishop Laura Aarons. And so we've been working since that time. And what I think many of us think we would have done differently is, rather than jump right into the task force on reparations, to establish a commission on truth and reconciliation. Particularly here in Connecticut, we don't have county government here. We're incredibly provincial. In this tiny little pissant state, we have 169 separate fiefdoms that all are incredibly invested in keeping the integrity of that little town. And so the town I live in, for example, Glastonbury, is 58 square miles. It's the second largest geographic in the state. There's under 40,000 people in it, and people are complaining about setting aside less than 2% of the 58 square miles is zoned for more than single family housing. So that's what we're up against in the state of Connecticut. And of course, our Episcopal parishes parrot that. You know, in this town, we have 2 Episcopal churches. You know, every town has to have its own Episcopal church. That I think is our biggest battle, because we have a real solid core of folks who are committed to the work, but at the congregational level, it really is happening very sparsely. And so we realize that we need to do that work of truth and reconciliation before we can get particularly suburban congregations to talk about reparations. And so we're doing that work. It so happens that 2023 is the 175th anniversary of the abolition of legal slavery in the state of Connecticut. So we just had a meeting a few days ago where we decided we're going to use that as a hook for a big service observing that 175th anniversary and the legacy that carries for us. And that is going to attract people who are already kind of open to the notion of reparations. And so we're still trying to crack the nut of how at the congregational level we get, first of all, a recognition that this is important work for all of us, even if we live in a primarily white suburb, why that's important and how we need to get involved. And I will share one of the issues we've had in terms of truth telling is many of the people of color have been doing this for their whole lives and are kind of getting tired of being asked one more time to share your story. And so one of the questions is, how do we do this work at the congregational level without re-injuring people who have already suffered injury and continue to suffer injury? And so Ranjit actually, Ken Ranjit, who's responsible for this broader work in our diocese, hosted a wonderful Zoom teaching thing the other night about community organizing. And it was in the course of that I said, this is what we haven't done yet. And we really need to organize our own communities using community organization techniques to create ground level support for this work in Connecticut. And so I'm thinking that's part of our next work.
Excellent. I love the notion of the community organizing piece. I actually think that may be something that can help some of our parishes who are struggling to just exist,
Yeah.
To exist and potentially grow.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's great. Let's see. Bishop Doug, so you shared a little bit about what's going on with Western Mass, and mentioned the resolution. Any thoughts as to, what you did right and what you might do differently?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of work to do just in terms of history, and we don't have the same number of pre-Revolutionary War churches as some of the other places in Province 1, but to get a model for doing that. So a model for doing that is St. John's in Ashford, and they've done their 200-year-old church, and they've done a lot of work. And so even just to be able to model that for other churches, and then we have this commission that worked on the resolution. But we're real clear that we don't want the resolution just kind of appear out of nowhere. We want people to be prepped for it. So we're planning this now for the fall of meetings about this that'll happen. We have what's called regional ministries, and so that would happen in all these different regional ministries, so that when people get into convention, that they're already prepped for this. Too, we're really inspired by the Diocese of Massachusetts. It's what they did at the last convention. I thought was tremendous and challenging, and inspires us to do more.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So New Hampshire, as Betty said, we actually passed our first resolution around reparations a couple of years ago, that was led by our thinking and working with the New Hampshire Black Heritage Trail. And some of you are aware of the Black Heritage Trail and the great work it's doing about raising awareness of the fact that there were Black people in New Hampshire ages ago that people don't know about. So we began by working with the Black Heritage Trail actually to do during Lent, telling every day of Lent a story of an African-American in New Hampshire. And that was so that we could raise awareness that, yes, there were African-Americans in New Hampshire, and we highlighted places where there were Episcopal churches where these Black people were. And we did that because we realized we needed to do this. It's a form of truth-telling, if you will. It's telling the stories. It's stories that the Black Heritage Trail was already digging up. So that's where we started. And then the next year, we put forth a resolution to invite parishes into covenant to tell their own stories about how African-Americans lived in their parishes. I'd have to say that I don't think we got the participation that we wanted, but we put forth that notion, and we also put money into and offered training from the Black Heritage Trail to parishes who wanted to know how to do that work, because we recognized that parishes wouldn't necessarily know how to dig into the history and find those kinds of stories. The next year, what we passed as a resolution was to invite parishes and everyone in the diocese to take part in Sacred Ground gatherings, which Betty actually helped to lead across the diocese. And we got I think we got, was it 60 parishes in the diocese, Betty? Some number like that. Betty was our number taker, so.
I've got it written down. I don't remember it, but a goodly number. It was a sacred ground or something that, raised the issue and gave people a chance to discuss history that they may not have, and in most cases did not know.
Right. So the notion, and Bishop Rob really guided us this way, because I was one who wanted to jump in and really just have the conversations about the repair. But Bishop Rob was wise enough to say, well, let's build the groundwork first. So that's why these resolutions throughout the years were more about the telling the stories and education. And at our convention 2 years ago, we actually, to kind of your point about stories, and we actually had some videos from folks who participated in the work that told the story of how they went about doing the work and how valuable it was. So now this year, we decided we're going to have a resolution that does focus on reparations squarely. And we're in the process of forming it. And when we crafted it, we did say we need to put a monetary figure to it. And we said we want to do things, and I actually mapped out efforts that we could take in each of the pillars of beloved community. So efforts we could take in storytelling, efforts we could take in proclaiming the dream, efforts we could take in repairing the breach, and efforts we could take in practicing the way of love. So that framework still exists, and we've come to the decision that we wanted to make this a time where we commit to building infrastructure around reparations. So again, it's not going to be doing that direct reparations work, but building the reparations muscle, if you want to use that term, so that when we do go full having the work being done, we have an infrastructure that will support that. And so also thinking about the collaborations with other organizations, so we know that's very important. Having an accountability buddy, if you will. I'm good friends with Willard Lett and Brenda Lett, who are the male chair and treasurer for NCOBRA, the National Conference on Reparations in America. So we're going to be working with them as our accountability partner to make sure that we're, and with other organizations, well, we're going to hopefully, and I've been trying to create a conference around reparations for a number of years to bring these parties together. And I think with this funding that we're going to be putting into our resolution to create infrastructure, we're going to finally have that conference. So that's where we are. I think what we did right was we built the groundwork for this. We didn't just say we're going to spend money to pay for scholarships for 50 students of color. So I think that was what's good. I think in hindsight, for me at least, what I would have liked to have seen done a little bit better is more advertising around what we've been doing. We also we have convocations, regions of the state that we have gone to with each of our resolutions every year and tried to get them educated. But I don't think we put enough push behind those efforts to spread the word about what we've been doing. So that's what I would improve. And Betty, I don't know if did I miss anything?
We know that some people have done stories, but we haven't been as good at collecting those stories.
Yes.
So we want to collect the stories and then again, urge more telling of those stories and having a place to put them and a place that people know where they are.
Right. So Ranjit, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, James, if I could just supplement to my colleague and friend Dawn's sharing, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was brought up with respect to what you were sharing about laying the groundwork. And I think part of our challenge, at least on the task force, and Dawn, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know our other co-convener cannot be on the call, is there is a level and a number of people on the task force who certainly want to move forward towards reparation. And also there are others who really want to build that sort of architecture around truth and reconciliation. And so that movement is real. And I think that would be true on a micro level more broadly within tech. And I think we've done some good work around architecture in terms of, some ground building, building some work on the ground with respect to like, our racial healing, justice and reconciliation ministry network, which is 6 years of work that has been going on for, 6 years, that has been doing the work in Connecticut alongside, my position as canon on diocesan staff. Also, our diocesan archivist every 4 months leads a call with other archivists across Connecticut on looking into our own histories as parishes and building up those tools of excavating our complicity within enslavement, the institution of enslavement. So, while that maybe only get 15, 16 people out of 153 worshiping parishes, that groundwork, I think, is just really helpful, in addition to having a task force that examines also our Title IV process around racism, misogyny, and homophobia. And any number of things that you have parallel pieces of architecture in the diocese, our archivist, this ministry network, this task force, my office, anti-bias trainings for, clergy parishes are going to call rectors or priests in charge, and you cannot be on any diocesan appointed committee. Nothing, no standing committee, no donation and bequests, no commission on ministry, no mission council if you have not gone through anti-racism training. So my point is, James, is that architecture is there, but it may take a little bit more time before we're able to get to reparations, but we're building the architecture, and we're even doing some preliminary work around, our canon for mission finances, doing some preliminary work around, where we have received our wealth. So, but that has to come with respect to a resolution. But we haven't yet got there, and I think we want to get there, but we try to listen to one another as different groups so that we're all moving in a particular direction.
Thank you for that. And I think the notion of archives is something that I just took a note that we haven't really talked about in our diocese, looking into our, at least diocesan archives, to see where there might have been complicity. So I want to take that back, certainly for our Reconciliation Commission set of recommendations. I am curious, you also mentioned something that I think is very important, and at the national level, I've pushed for this, and we have resolutions around this, which don't really have any teeth, but they're out there, that anyone who is taking a leadership position in the church must have had anti-racism training. And we in the past haven't really said what that means. It's been left up to the bishop's discretion. So it could be an hour's worth of, here's what racism is training, and that suffices. Even though we passed a general convention in 2018, a resolution around what we call the framework for anti-racism training, that sets the rubrics for what training is necessary, or what skills and knowledge we believe are necessary for anybody to truly do this work. So I really like that idea of putting some teeth behind that resolution at the diocesan level, and that's something I want to take back. And I'm wondering if you all have that same kind of effort in your diocese to really require that people who are coming into those leadership positions have gone through some training.
Well, James, let me just respond by saying that that came in our 2020 resolution that made it mandatory, and even for vestries and clergy and staff. And it's really hard, right? And we just had a meeting, Bishop Jeff and I, with our donations and bequests, just a week and a half ago, and saying that this is mandatory, and we had somebody resign. So,
Wow.
because So, I mean, I just say that because it's good to be transparent, but if we're not going to enforce with an invitational sort of, this is for our own wholeness here. I'm not sure anybody's going to be willing to do anything.
Great point. I see Reverend Joyce has a hand up.
Plug me. Yes, I here in Rhode Island, because of here at Church of the Redeemer, where I am a parishioner, I'm no longer an active deacon. We have gotten together with the work that we're doing, and we put that to the diocese with regards to doing anti-racism training, because we really feel it needs to be done.
Right. A few years ago, actually, and I see Reverend Rowena is on the call. We developed a anti-racism reconciliation training along with the Kaleidoscope Institute and Bexley Seabury Seminary, and offered it to the Northern New England Diocese of Vermont. And folks, we actually offered it to everyone in the province, but we did it because we recognized that there wasn't really any training that was close enough geographically for people in the ordination process and beyond, from the northern states of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And that's something that I'm hoping we can bring back. I know that Vermont is actually working on a training, but I think one of the challenges we faced in the northern states is there's been training in the southern states, but traveling to the southern states for that training is a bit of an ask. So I really am hoping we can make sure that training happens for the northern New England states going forward to that point. Betty, you're on mute, Betty.
I believe Chris had his hand up first.
Oh, okay. Chris?
Thank you. And I'm happy to defer because I know we haven't heard from every diocese, and my diocese is Massachusetts, and we've heard from several of us already. But maybe if we get to the end of this block of time and there's a moment, I have one or two things I'd like to add as well.
Okay. So I think Vermont and Maine are the only two who haven't said anything yet. I know Bishop Shannon is here, and I think Elizabeth I saw here from Vermont. Anything you folks want to share, or we can go into question time? Oh, sorry, after Betty. Betty, you had something to say.
I just wanted to say that since the pandemic, the Absalom Jones Center in the Diocese of Atlanta now offers online anti-racism training. And so that's another option.
Right, good. So Emily, I see your hand up, and then Kit.
Kit may be just weighing in from Maine as well, so I won't say much. Pardon me, I'm on my phone, so my access here is limited, but I'm the staff liaison to our Racial Justice Council here in Maine, and so I convene the Justice Commission, and then all of the Justice Councils operate underneath it, so that the structure is working really well. It's a new structure, and it's designed to be able to support each individual council doing their own work, but also being able to work laterally and to increase that collaboration. So everybody's sending someone to speak directly to the Justice Commission. With that said, what we have been up to is doing a lot of listening. We're participating in some training with Catherine Meeks throughout this year. In fact, our clergy are going in another couple of weeks on a retreat with her. Our Racial Justice Council specifically has been doing a lot of work looking at our diocesan investments and working with our trustees to unpack where our investments are going. And there's kind of some talk about, putting together a call for action or potentially a resolution. We're just discerning that at this point. I think a lot of our parishes are doing some great work. Byron, thank you for mentioning St. Paul's Brunswick in the comments there as those colonial churches. I think they are really doing some incredible work digging into their history, and they just hosted an anti-racism event where they really dug carefully and deeply into their parish history and invited the community. They also offer sacred ground that is secular, and they open that up free of charge to their community as well. So one of the things that I think is working really well is we're using Sacred Ground a lot as a tool. We have a tri-diocesan Sacred Ground. So Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are participating together as those, northern New England states, and that seems to be great. We also just this past 6 months or so have entered into a partnership with the Diocese of Alabama, knowing that Maine's racial history and political reality currently is very different than Alabama's. We're partnering with them and learning together. So I think that's where we are at the moment. I'm learning lots and taking furious notes as I hear from all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Reverend Kidd, you got that bi-diocesan thing going there.
Well, I'm no longer bi-diocesan because I'm officially canonically resident in New Hampshire.
Okay.
But I just wanted to say Emily covered all the main stuff mostly that I was thinking about, but I also wanted to say that we were grateful when I was chair of the Commission on Ministry in Maine 2 years ago. We were hugely grateful for the Bexley Kaleidoscope collaboration, which enabled us to get some of our postulants and I think lay leaders trained, which was fabulous. And the other was, I just wanted to let folks know that I'm on the joint nominating committee for the election of the next presiding bishop. And we, the joint nominating committee, have been working with Kaleidoscope around issues of implicit bias that might impact the search. So we're doing that, and that's been important to our work and will become more important in the next phase. So that's all I really have to say there.
Excellent, thank you. And I can share that the whole notion of implicit bias in selection of leaders is an issue that the Executive Council Meeting on Anti-Racism and Reconciliation that I chair raised at last General Convention. And there was actually a resolution around it this past convention to focus on that very issue across the church. So I think we'll see some guidance rolling out from the church on that coming forward. Bishop Shannon.
Sorry about that delay there. Yeah, and I wasn't going to say this, but when you talk about implicit bias, I also have to say there's, I don't know if this is a term, but there's implicit assumptions as well that get in the way of our work so much as a church. And especially, and I don't know, I think it's sort of this region of the country that there's a lot of like liberal thought that goes into how we want to approach things like reparations, and some of the groundwork that needs to be done, which is often avoided, is unfortunate. So in our diocese, I will say, we aren't even having conversations about reparations. We just need, basics. You've heard about the Sacred Ground training that's going on, or circles that are going on, and that we are that the work that we're doing with Catherine Meeks is, when she has a set way of working with dioceses to develop their own formation around anti-racism or healing racism training that will also take into account like our involvement with Indigenous groups that are in our diocese, you know, and that were pre-existing any of this, which also, you know, reparations, I haven't heard anyone say anything about just the different notion of reparations when you're talking to Indigenous communities. They don't talk about it the way we're talking about it here today. And I don't like to even use the word they, but this is, you know, from conversations that I've had. So you know, we're still at the very beginning stages, and a lot of it has to do with truth telling. Knowing our stories, and, you know, and our story really does impact the larger church. When you think of John Henry Hopkins and his impact on the whole church, and that is just not widely, it wasn't widely known until I came, that was a thing. And then, so knowing that, along with even Bishop Booth, who was a supporter of the eugenics movement, and invited the head of the eugenics movement to our convention way back when, and the only buildings that have, you know, that were named after any bishops were named after Hopkins and Booth, which is a truth-telling matter that people, I mean, you know, I haven't been here that long and people don't even know that. So we're at the very beginning stages, and it's an odd thing to be the one that has to say, hey, let's tell some truth about this. Anyway, so I think that's all I'll say for now.
Well, thank you all for sharing, and you know, one of the things that we've been thinking about as we've crafted our resolution here in New Hampshire is there an opportunity to work across dioceses with resolutions and to support each other's resolutions? So I'm wondering what folks have in terms of thoughts around that question, or just open it up for time now to ask questions of each other. Now that you've heard what's been happening in the other dioceses, this is a time to just ask questions. Chris, Reverend Chris. Go ahead.
I'll ask a question. Someone about 20 minutes ago mentioned the challenges and opportunities associated with collecting stories of harm from individuals or communities within your diocese who have a story to share regarding experiencing racism, experiencing oppression at the hands of within the life of the church, or even outside of the church, but in our region. And I'm curious, we are also embarking down that path and have made some initial, have had a few attempts at collecting stories of harm from individuals and trying to catalog them. And I'm curious if other dioceses have had, have gone through, you know, kind of discernment protocol around confidentiality agreement, you know, how we're going to have integrity and accountability to the individuals whose stories we're collecting, because once we collect them, if we collect them electronically, we'll have them for a long time. And so I'm curious what, if any diocese has stuff on paper around that, we'd love to see that.
Great question. Betty, and I think that was Don, did you in Connecticut were mentioning the re-traumatization, weren't you? Yeah, so Betty, you have a thought, and then maybe we can have Don.
Just that the things that you mentioned earlier that we did with the Black Heritage Trail, we published those 40 stories. Those were primarily quite early African Americans who were in the state of New Hampshire. And that is a published book called How the Light Gets In. And the diocese, in addition to the story, the diocese wrote a collect for each day to go with the story.
So I think the point there is that there was a professional organization that was doing that research. And where the challenge comes in, I think, is that when we try to get the parishes to do that kind of research, then we're engaging with the people of color potentially in those parishes, and that may be where the re-traumatization could come in. But whether Don, can you shed some light on your observations there? And I see Ken Ranjit also had his hand up.
Yeah, Ranjit, I'll defer to you since that you see the whole diocesan picture on a day-to-day basis, and then I'll supplement whatever you want to say.
Yeah, thanks, Don. And I think this should be a space where we don't just share our perfection here, but really live into vulnerability. And I think last year at our diocesan convention, we had, I think, opportunity writ large from my office and other groups just to share and lead a little bit. And I think we did, and we offered a litany that I think, while it was powerful, just maybe caused some pain, and how to be careful when we do that and to not do that. So I think, to Chris's point, is just really important. And we're going to work for our task force on reparations. We're going to work with Don's co-convener, who's a state attorney around human rights and civil rights, and her group, CHRO, which I'm now forgetting, is going to provide free of charge to us trained facilitators who know this work, and they're going to help us throughout our regions in lifting it up. So,
yeah, it's the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities,
Right.
And they've reached out. They're going to, with Cheryl's assistance, going to help. Connecticut's divided into 6 regions, and there are 3 regional missionaries, each responsible for 2 of those regions. So we're going to work through the region missionaries and have something in each, 2 regions together, kind of a convocation sort of thing. Another way we've gotten around the issue of individuals telling stories is that a number of clergy who are part of the task force, clergy of color, are intimately familiar with a history of Black parishes not being supported and allowed to go out of business, while similarly situated white congregations were supported by the diocese and lifted up and went on to new life. And so we're collecting those stories as a task force because they're contained in parish histories. And it's not asking people to retell a painful story. So that's work we're doing at the parish level. And then again, at these regional convocations, we will invite what may be written testimony. So people may not have to stand up in front of a group and speak if that's painful to them, but supply written reflections to us.
Great, thanks for that. Bishop Shannon, your hand is up.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so part of our, a big part of our struggle is that clergy-wise, there are 3 Black clergy in our diocese, including me. One who's canonically resident in Massachusetts, brand new priest, not even a year. In our parishes, this is not a multiracial conversation. These are white folks talking to white folks. This is theory, except for when it comes to the fact that I am present constantly in every parish, not physically. And I mean, in our cathedral, there are Black people, but it's, the variety is that there's still like maybe a few, maybe 3 African Americans. The rest are African immigrants. Don't know of anybody from the Caribbean. And then in a couple of other parishes, again, it's like I can not even 10, I would say. So that's a struggle. To make it be more than just good thoughts. So the truth telling, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to have it done well and right, because there aren't people to hear from except for to face what has been done, and what has been sanctified is good.
I think this so highlights the difference in our diocese, where the southern part of New England has so many more people of color, where that re-traumatization should be an issue, versus the other states where there aren't that many. And we do tend to try to blend in. We do tend to not want to have this discussion because we're kind of dealing with it, and some of us, and we've figured out how to deal with it in our brains. So this is why it's good to hear about the differences and recognize that there are differences in demographics and how we need to approach things. So I think I saw Byron's hand up, and then Reverend Joyce had her hand up again. It's things.
So, right. So James and Shannon's comments just brought me to ask about the parochial report. So how many of you, the majority of your parishes, answered the question on race? Anybody, the majority of the parishes answered the question on race?
I don't
The
think
people,
so.
the people with the least colored people did it. I think it's disgraceful, and I think you need to really work on making sure you count the colored people in the room in your parishes for next parochial report.
And we expanded the language around what,
Oh yes, and
we did lots. You saw that, Byron, didn't you? Yeah.
that's right.
You
That's
came
right.
and met
And
with us.
right, because you took it seriously, so you could argue with what the categories that you were given. Yes.
Right.
Anybody want to say anything about it? I really think I really found it outrageous, the response to that in this church, including 815, which then, because originally it was going to be a mandatory question.
Oh.
Byron, can you share a little bit more? I didn't quite hear exactly what you're saying.
I'm saying that in the parochial report, for the first time, we asked people to give a census of a racial ethnic census of their parishes in the parochial report. And I would say the majority of bishops did not support that in the church. And I'm not sure how it happened, but what was supposed to be a mandatory question, like all the rest of them, it shifted and it was no longer mandatory. I'm waiting for the Committee on the Church of the State to report on what percentage of churches in the church answered that. Right. But I think it's nuts. And so, and I think if you can't say how many colored people you have, you're so far away from doing any of this work.
So is everyone aware at least of what the parochial report is, and also of the racial equity audit that was done by the church?
Yeah, but this is not the audit.
I know.
The numbers.
This is about the numbers in the parochial report, but I'm also trying to take this opportunity to ask if folks are aware of the audit that was done, because I know not everyone in the church knows that it was done. Not everyone was touched by it, but I think this group particularly should know about it, about the fact that it happened.
I don't think here in Rhode Island that they did that, to be honest with you. We've discussed it in the church, in the meetings that we've been having on anti-racism. We've discussed that, saying it's something that should be done, but I don't believe it's something that has been spoken about in the diocese at all to be done. For here in Rhode Island, we have very few people of color in the majority. We have 50 parishes, and I can name only 3 parishes that have about 10 people of color in them. The rest are totally white. And we have exactly, I think, probably 2 people of color as priests. I'm the only person of color as a deacon. So it's not something that has been approached yet here. Rhode Island is a state where things are taken very slowly.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm hoping that this group will push for that kind of reporting to actually take place going
Yes,
forward.
it should take place.
Right. This is the group that can push that. This is the group that should push that in our respective dioceses. Reverend Kit, and then I saw Ken Ranjit, and then Anne.
Mercifully, I did not have to prepare parochial reports this year because I was between parishes during that time. Having done 2 last year, I figured I earned a break. But I will say I'm not looking forward. I will absolutely endeavor to do this next year, but I am not looking forward to the responses from my congregation. And I'm also really concerned if white parochial clergy decide that they're going to fill out the report for the members of their congregation, because we get undercounted. You know, I'm Chinese American, and I assume that most white clergy are going to put me in the white box if they don't know me and pay attention. And I don't want to be labeled that way. And I also don't want to be responsible for misrepresenting other people. And so I know that there was, there were instructions about how to do that. And I just, I'm in New Hampshire, and I just can't even begin to imagine what folks in my congregation are going to have to say about that. And I'm not happy about it, but there we are. Which I suppose is a way of saying I'm really interested in support and sort of working suggestions about how we address this.
Thank you. Maybe I didn't see anyone. Bishop Shannon, you're up.
You should be in touch with our Canon to the Ordinary. We had a clergy meeting about it because people were up in arms. They're like, "Oh no, that's not right to label people and blah 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 blah," because they're all white and they didn't. And I said, "But if you don't, there's no numbers. We're invisible. Then if you don't count us, and we don't really tell a true story about who we are as a church. We have all these great thoughts about who we are, but you actually have to check and see who is there, and give people a way to name themselves that is more expansive. Because I won't even go into it, but anyway, and if you want to invite me to come and talk to people there, talk with Bishop Brown about inviting me, and I will talk about why it's really important. And it's not doing us any favor to say it's not right to label people. That's
Yeah, I think there are 2 issues that I'm observing, and we observe this also. I served on the governor's Law Enforcement Accountability, Community and Transparency Commission, and we're dealing with this with the legislature, with police. How do you get the records to have racial identity so that we can track who's being pulled over improperly, right? So I think there are 2 issues here. One is some people don't believe it should be done. The other issue is how do you do it in such a way that the information is accurate? And we need to spread the word on both of those. And Bishop Shannon, thank you for offering to come speak on the issue of the why, and also your insights into how to do it.
I'll go anywhere. I mean, I'll talk to anybody. There's Zoom, so maybe it's a province-wide conversation.
Right, right. So maybe that is, I guess we take this as a note, Will, and this actually, well, we're about 10 minutes more of question, but the next segment here is what should we be talking about and who else should we have at the table as we talk about it. So we'll put that in the parking lot for the next 10 minutes or so is one issue that we want to get back to. But I do want to get back to questions around what people are doing around reparations. Questions around the resolutions, questions around issues are raised about money and how much money and what the money should go to. So questions, other questions for folks. Anne, and you had your hand up before, and I think you took your hand down, and that's why I didn't remember your hand was up. So go ahead, please.
It's really because I don't know where this belongs. But I work with the I'm from Maine, and I work with the Episcopal Committee on Indian Relations. And I don't know how many people are aware, but the state of Maine does not recognize the four federally recognized tribes, does not recognize their sovereignty. Okay, so Maine actually has legal racism. And so what we've been doing through, Sacred Circles and all Church Next programs and things, is to try to make people aware of things. And we've had resolutions to support our Indigenous neighbors. Last year, we almost got the bill through so that the 4 tribes would be recognized at the same level as the other 153 federally recognized tribes in the United States. It got to the governor's desk and she refused to sign it. So we've been lobbying, and we've been engaged in circles where we've been discussing a book called The Gatherings. We've been supporting 2 different videos that are available. Bounty, which is about the history of Native American scalps being traded for money. And yeah, and also Dawnland, which goes through the Truth and Reconciliation process that took place in Maine. So, and as a committee, we don't have a lot of money for the reconciliation, but what we have done is, since there's a state law that says that everybody has to have a pass to go on state land, the Indigenous people were not able to go to their sacred grounds because they're in the middle of state lands. So we have paid for the tribes to be able to access that. It's a small thing, but I think it's what we've been able to do, and I think it's important it's recognized.
So Maine is in one of those very interesting positions where we New Hampshire drove most of the Indigenous people over to Maine, so we don't have as many as you do. And it's definitely an issue. And I think it's been brought up before about when we talk about racial reconciliation, it's not just African Americans, it's also about the Indigenous people and the challenges that they've had to endure as well. So I think this is a great place to bring it up, and maybe that we'll put that on the list of topics as well that we could talk about at another gathering. I did want to ask a question for those dioceses that have in their resolutions a monetary number. Where is that money coming from? Where is that money going to come from? I know in New Hampshire, we've had discussions about, because we originally put forth, I pushed for $250,000 and we'd allocated that in a number of ways, and immediately got pushed back. Well, that's a huge amount of money given our budgets, our overall budget for the diocese. So then we had a number of discussions about where that money would come. So I'm curious to hear from the other dioceses who've kind of thought about this. Where do you think your money's coming from? And I see Reverend Chris has his hand up.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start since we did our funding resolution last October, so it's already policy for us. Basically, it's coming from everywhere. Everyone has to have skin in the game, so to speak, here, and so that includes the trust funds that the diocese has full control over. A sliver of that is coming. It includes trust funds that are held in trust for the diocese that we can skim the income off of for a number of years, even if we can't touch the principal. It includes the bishop directed funds, which are a separate trust. Yet again, a portion of that is called on to be brought into the reparations fund. And then it also includes essentially a cut of assessment revenue, if not in the immediate year, but in the subsequent year, because our canons don't allow it to. We're not allowed to do that by resolution for the current budget year, but we can for future budget years. So we have assessment revenue coming in. And then we also call for individual congregations, communities of worship, and individual Episcopalians to consider making their own contributions to the fund. So really, it's every pot is contributing here. And the reason for that, I think that's so important, because in our context, we need to realize, at least in a large and broad diocese like Massachusetts, everyone is involved, not just our 13 colonial parishes, not just our parishes who were founded from 19th century wealth, but even our parishes founded from 20th century wealth, and even our current congregations that are starting. Reparations is certainly about making repair for the harms of slavery. And it's a generational obligation it's not tit for tat. It's not because, my parish was this guilty, I pay this much. That's not how it works. And so I that's the approach that we're taking in Massachusetts anyway. And I think that was both a tough pill to swallow for lots of folks, but the right pill to swallow for us. Ranjit, you look like you want to say something in response.
No, I mean, Chris, I think it's great, and I think this space is so good for us to have the conversation. But that resolution, and I saw it on Twitter back in October of 2020. I was like, and it passed unanimously.
Nearly. There were one or two no's in the back.
Well, I mean, out of how many delegates, that's incredible. And I would imagine it's up to the rector and/or the priest of charge to then go to the vestry, share that, and then move into that conversation. And then you said, Chris, inviting parishes to participate in that. I mean, when we ask that question, we want you to participate. Is that enforceable?
No, but here's the situation. This is a long-term funding strategy for us. We are not, the goal is to get to something like $11 million. Right. But that's going to happen over years, not in 1 year or 2 years, or I think 5 is optimistic, but somewhere around there. And the mandatory parts of this resolution fall on the endowed funds of the diocese and on the diocesan operating budget, because the diocese should lead by example, and parishes and congregations should be encouraged to follow that example. What we decide to require of congregations in the future is obviously an open question, and that will probably be an even more vigorous debate at convention. But for now, we do anticipate that there will be a number of houses of worship in our diocese that will participate financially over the next several years. There are a lot of parishes already doing the historical work, already talking about financial commitment, that are looking for guidance. And between the reparations subcommittee of the diocese, the community of practice that Byron spoke about earlier, the work of Episcopal City Mission, which I think Claudia mentioned in the chat. You know, this is a movement. It's not a top-down coordinated, you know, you will get in line. This is a movement within the Diocese of Massachusetts to say this matters. This is going to be at the heart of our common life, and that means money.
Thank you. I think that's some great advice and great observations. I think I saw Reverend Rowena with her hand up.
Yes, you did. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a bit noisy in my background, but just a quick question that I always struggle with. How do you come up with those numbers for reparations? Do you just pick a number and work towards that, or is there some formula behind those numbers? Because I'll be honest and upfront. As a person of color, it concerns me about those numbers that are placed for reparation pools.
I think you first have to decide you're going to do it. You see, and then because I consider that a detail. You see, but I do think you have to decide that reparations mean at some point delivering cash to people. And now where you fit in that whole process, which is a very complicated process, and it's going to get more complicated as more people decide that they want to work on reparations. But the first question is reparations and cash, and then work on the details. And that is accomplished, I think. There are various ways to accomplish that. I think in Massachusetts, it was a decision to accumulate the money and not talk about how you spent it at the moment that you're accumulating it.
So I think that's a good approach to saying, first, have everybody recognize that there is money that needs to be applied. I think the way that you determine how much money, from what I have seen across the country, varies wildly. You know, when we were putting our numbers together, it was sort of it's kind of like creating a business plan. You pull a number out of a hat that seems to be at least not nothing, but not the whole kit and caboodle. And so when we looked at thinking about, so we want to provide scholarships. Well, how many do we provide? And how much money is that going to cost? And we said, well, maybe we start with a small number like 5 to just get into it. And just going back and forth like that between people in our Reconciliation Commission, smaller subcommittee working on reparations, we just came up with a number that felt like it was at least something to propose, to get feedback on. Not that we thought that was necessarily going to be the final number, which it actually wasn't. But sometimes you have to just put a number out there, see how it goes, and take it from there. All right, we are at 4:28, so thank you everybody for that rich discussion. I think I'd like to move us into the next section of our time together, where we talk about what are the conversations we need to have in the future, and whom should we invite. And we've got a few already, I think we put in the parking lot, around the notion of how do we get people to capture this data for our parishes, so that they can be in our parochial reports. And I think we had a couple of others that I think Will kept into the chat there. I think this notion of how do you determine how much money to identify, it might be an interesting topic for going forward. But what else would you like to have discussions about in the future? And maybe we even create Will and I have been talking about creating a mechanism where we can have this conversation in between the times that we meet. Don't let it be just these Zoom meetings that we have these conversations, but a Google group or some mechanism it's a Facebook group or some way that we can continue these conversations offline. But what topics, other than the ones we've discussed, would you like us to allocate some space for in future meetings?
Would it be possible to get some people from other dioceses outside of Province 1 who have already started on giving out reparations and how that's gone? Like, I know that's true for the Diocese of Long Island. I think it also might be true for Maryland and DC. I'm not sure, but there are particular dioceses that are further down the road, and just get their experience.
Yeah, that's a great notion. It's something that in ECAR, the Executive Council Committee, we've actually had our provincial representatives share what's been going on with reparations in their provinces. And there is, I seem to recall, there was a reparations summit that happened a few months ago, and I'll go back and look it up and see. I think they may have recorded that. Byron, do you remember whether they recorded that? I'll check into that. But I think we could have some representatives from New York and New Jersey and Maryland. And California's done some work as well. So we could see about having some of them come in and share where they are and
Great.
what their insights were.
Thank you.
Yeah, Doug, I think that's a good idea. But I do think we have to be careful, right? And about that we're talking about people who are defining this the way we are beginning to define it, right? So I wouldn't invite the Diocese of Texas. I just think that their model is just awful. So we can have those arguments. I don't have any problem having it with them, right?
Yeah, I think that's a point too, that and if we've seen it just here in New England, we're all different dioceses.
Right.
Yeah, all have different challenges.
Let me back up a little bit because I'm using too much shorthand, I think. And that is, I think it is really important that we do not say what we should be doing anyway is reparations. You see, if we should be giving scholarships to people of color anyway, it doesn't matter what their history was, right? We should, if they're poor or working class, we should be giving them scholarships. And then when we decide to give them scholarships, I think we just call it what it is. We're giving them scholarships, not reparations.
So I think somebody mentioned in the chat, and I kind of captured it. Perhaps we should have a discussion about what is reparations. And COBRA has a definition. Other organizations have definitions.
That's right. For people who want to do it.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that might be an interesting conversation for us to have. I've done workshops on it myself, so I know the different definitions people have. So that might be a good discussion.
I mean, in all the progressive movements among Black people in this country, we have been always defining and redefining what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And so in that sense, it's a very appropriate conversation to be having because everybody had what that end was that they wanted, right?
Right. Ranji, I think I saw your hand up next.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't need to say it, but I need to say it for my own self. But, to Byron's point, I mean, I think maybe any diocese can have a property and then we take money that we're skimming off of that to put towards this work. And that is not the work.
Right.
That is not reparations. That's just taking some money and moving. It's deeply theological and spiritual. And if we're not asking every parish to move through that and how tethered they are to enslavement, then that is the work. It's not just to let's give some money here. It's missing the whole spiritual theological point and so I think we need to be very careful about what we're doing and how we're leaning into it and where it's coming from.
Right. I agree. And how we express it. Yes.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on topics, and also the question of who's not at this table? Who should we be ensuring we invite to this conversation? And we did invite all of the bishops, and not everyone can come because of obligations, but thinking about also who else should we be inviting to this conversation, along with what other topics might we discuss? Connie.
Well, I think we should be inviting Reverend Arrington Chambliss, who's the director of this Episcopal City Mission, and who's deeply involved in the reparations movement that Chris eloquently referred to a few minutes ago.
And I think we should we remember we have in Massachusetts we have 14 colonial churches. Just happened that one became Unitarian during the American Revolution. So I do think King's Chapel should be on our list of invitees. They don't have to, they might not want to, but I do think they should be.
Okay. Other topics or folks we should be inviting to this table? So I'll just ask this way. What's one question you have to move your effort in your diocese forward? One question that kind of comes to my mind is, how do we deal with the pushback? Pushback comes in the form of denial, in the form of wanting to shift the topic. How do we deal with that denial? Bishop Shannon.
Okay, so I'm often how do I want to put this? So this is Episcopalians don't like the idea of mentioning that it's scriptural. There are powers and principalities. The kinds of things that got us here are not just about people, and they're not just going to go away. And it's a spiritual thing. And so this is work that, I don't want to just say, okay, just pray it away. But if we're actually doing something, people do want this to be feel good work, by the way, I'll just say that. There has to be pushback. It's not even, there's no way to do it without there being pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And so just knowing that there's got to be a certain spiritual practice that people have about this work. Think about, Dr. King told people that were part of the movement with him that, they had to have a spiritual practice. There were, line of things, prayer and taking care of yourself physically and, other things. But this is not, there's no way to avoid pushback. And so being very clear about it, finding people that you're not doing it alone. This is not something that you can do alone. That's all I can say. That is the fact. People don't want to feel ashamed of their possible participation, but there's no way around it.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I was raising it as a potential question for us to talk about in more detail at a future conversation. And not that we recognize it's there.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, sorry, you got me started on a thing that I love to talk about.
And which, as you're saying so eloquently, we could have a whole session on it, right?
Yeah.
I just saw Rowena put into the chat, perhaps we can talk about bishops and commissions on ministry chairs, on how they're inviting and raising up clergy of color in their diocese, as well as supporting parishes with predominantly people of color. So that's a great point, and it makes me ask the question, and this is probably a question for Will. So the bishops get together. Do they get together outside of synod gathering?
Well, we also happen to have the president of the Province One House of Bishops on the call. So I can say, and Bishop Doug, correct me if I'm incorrect, that at least yearly they gather in retreat at Barbara C. Harris Camp. And I assume that y'all meet more often, not in person.
Right, we meet in person every December, and then a lot of times it's about a particular issue that'll happen, and we talk about whether to issue a statement about those issues. And a lot of times it's just, Shannon's on this call too. A lot of times it's just emails that go back and forth, gathering together people's experience about X, Y, or Z. So there's a formal part to it, and there's a lot of informal part to it.
So to Rowena's question, is there opportunity to have this topic be a discussion at a bishop's gathering?
Yes, definitely.
Great. And then comm chairs, I don't know that comm chairs gets together. From my time being involved in comm, I don't remember them getting together, but has anything changed in that?
I'm pretty sure that doesn't mean that something couldn't happen, but I'm pretty sure that they don't.
So maybe that's something to look into. I'm not even sure how we look into that. I guess it's kind of through the bishops, or will you have contacts with? I guess the canons of the ordinary would be the ones who oversee that. So maybe getting them together.
I can certainly reach out and sort of build that up. That feels like it falls within my potential area of responsibility, is convening a conversation, or at least bringing up the possible convening of a conversation around that.
Okay, and I saw Kit, you had your hand up, and I saw you nodding your head as well. So.
Yeah, there was a conversation amongst comm chairs, and I can't remember if it was Province One or Northern New England, that was sponsored by the Diocese of New Hampshire a number of years ago when I was still a, comm chair in Maine. And I know there's been conversation about that continuing, and on a more church-wide level as well.
Okay.
James?
Yes, Roger.
Yeah, and this is, maybe just a larger question, but I think, is real for us here in the Episcopal Church of Connecticut is that, as we come out of, whatever, I know we'll keep on talking about coming out of COVID, and that's a real thing, right? And with, if we have 153 parishes and worshiping communities, intentional Episcopal communities, and, half of them are, maybe less than half-time or quarter time. And the ways in which, our diocese have resolutions that look like compliance, right? And the reality of how that sits on quarter time rectors or clergy or priests in charge, right? And then our work collectively around reparations and broader work, how does those two things are going to come into some reality, right? Of our own sense of purpose and call here. And, even getting vestry members, even to sign up for 1-year terms for some parishes is a real pull, right? And so no answer for that, but that's going to be real for us as we go even deeper and deeper, and we witness more mergings, more closings, things like that, just to pay attention to,
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. And I see Kelly in the chat is mentioning that Standing Commission on Formation is creating networks of comms. So maybe that's an opportunity to reach out to the comm chairs. And Kelly, as you're mentioning that, in your role as dean, are the deans from the other dioceses getting together and maybe able to talk about this topic of what is happening with the education structure across the province? And maybe Kelly's in a place where she can't come off mute and speak. So that's something we can circle back with Kelly and ask that question too. Or Will, if you know of Kelly's typing in, thanks for the question. Yes, several groups, collaboratives of deans discussing. Yeah, so it'd be great for us to know what's going on in those conversations and see where we can help out. All right, so we are at, by my clock, 4:46, and that means we've got about 10 minutes before we wanted to close. So if we could just, I guess we can probably put this in the chat, or if anyone feels they want to come off mute, but just want to give folks an opportunity to share one event that's going on in their diocese that Will should put on the calendar that he doesn't already have, so we can share what's going on across the province.
I guess I'd like to share for Connecticut is we're working with Dr. Christina Cleveland, social psychologist and activist and scholar, on something that we've entitled Decolonizing the Body of Christ. And that's sort of a 6-month sojourn, but our next meeting is May 18th from 5 to 9 p.m. at Christ Church Cathedral. And it's really about embodied work and decolonial work, but I think it's really serving as part of that architecture that we're talking about. And that's, people are welcome to come for it from all across the province. And again, we'll have a gathering in June, July, and then in August. So, but welcome anybody to come to that.
Excellent, thanks. Other events coming up in the next month or so that we want Will to put onto our provincial calendar. And if you can't, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, the Diocese of Massachusetts has been offering a series of similar to what Ranji just shared, decolonizing Christianity workshops by Brianna Clover. And she's a consultant who we've been working with as well on a kind of similar medium-term basis. And this isn't technically reparations work, but it's work that the Racial Justice Commission of our diocese has been calling us into. And I only mentioned here, the series is almost over, but all of the sessions are available, will be available online to watch after the fact. There's affinity groups for discussion that are going on in parallel. Those will not be available for anyone to watch. And I will post the link in the chat to where you can find the information.
Very good. Anyone else have an event coming up that we want Will to publicize? And you can take the homework assignment to send something to Will too. You don't have to have it right now.
And Will, if you're going to say that, just put my email address if people are interested, so they can let me know.
So everyone's thinking. I think we can let you all think and send it to Will what comes up. I'm sure other things will come to mind as soon as you get off the call, you'll think of something, right? It's the way it goes. So I think the next thing I wanted to just touch upon, which is not in the agenda, but it's always a good thing to touch upon, when should we meet again? We've talked about meeting on a quarterly basis, and I think that that kind of makes sense to me to meet on a quarterly basis, which would put us into, this is going to May, June, July, August, would put us into August if we did the 3 months out. I don't know whether folks want to try to not meet in August, if you want to do September. What is the will of the group here in terms of our next meeting?
I really found this meeting to be really helpful, and I'm also going to be on sabbatical June, July, and August. So if people want a September meeting, I'm all in.
All right, and I'm seeing September crop up in the chat. So let's do September. Works for me. Have a summer to recoup, and we'll look at the topics and see which one resonates most, and then create an agenda around it. So thank you, everybody. We have a closing prayer from Bishop Shannon.
Okay, so the community organizer in me has to say, we come to this work, and part of what we're supposed to do is say why we're engaged in this work, and what's our personal story. So I'm sorry, I'm also not exactly a Black preacher who, when you get asked to pray, there's a little bit of sermon that comes with it, so bear with me. But anyway, so the community organizer in me knows that we're supposed to say why we're here, what is a personal thing that brings us to this, whatever work it is that we are engaged in together. And so for me, the obvious thing is being, a Black woman. But there's other things too. What does it mean to be a Black leader in this church, and, the hard parts of it, the joys of it, the resilience of it. But then, someone who is descended from enslaved people, but also descended from slave owners. So there's a particular story in DNA that I carry that, brings trauma. And that is something that, as people talk about, sometimes, there's shame in this work, which I will say is a gift from God, that we don't need to avoid. Shame can be transformed into justice. I mean, it's there for a reason, to help us change, to move, to change ourselves, change society. And so sometimes people will say to me, oh, it's really hard because, I don't know if I have relatives that enslaved Black people. And I tell them, well, I know that I do have relatives that did. And they said, Black people that own Black people? No. That's not how our history works in this country. So I bring all of that, all that mixed up, complicated history to this work. And then also being in a state that is the second widest in the whole country. So it's a strange thing that I would not have accepted, but that God threw me into it, and I know I'm called to it. So I'm here. The other thing that I will say is that this is not just mine, is that I'm going to tell a little bit of your own story of why you're here. The question is, what does it look like for a denomination that exists because of empire, whose ways, ideals of goodness and beauty look like colonizers? That's why we're here, all of us. That's all of our story. And so often in our conversations about reparations, I do have to say that in some ways it does center colonizers. And so I wonder sometimes, are we asking the right questions? How do we understand our shared story? And this work is work that comes from conciliation and reconciliation actually within ourselves, with the complicated history that we each carry. Conciliation is because our system isn't broken. We aren't repairing something that was broken. We are making something new in this work. This work involves mourning and lament, truth-telling, well-stewarded hope, because we have hope. That's why we're doing it. And so we have to care for that hope. It involves resilience, listening, and humility. And so, and then I'm wondering, and I'm beginning now to pray, God, help us. How do we do the groundwork necessary without getting stuck so that no one has to face the impact of what justice costs? Help us, oh God. How do we not jump past the groundwork straight to absolving the church and ourselves from the harms of our past? And so I am pleading with you, God, let our work lead us to repentance, give us strength and courage, renew our hope, help us in our attempts to build beloved community. Because we need your imagination, oh God. So glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. Glory to God from generation to generation, in the church and in Christ Jesus, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. I just got a note from Don about hopefully making the meeting after September 16th. So we'll endeavor to choose 16th or after the 16th as our date. And I guess I should ask, anybody have a preference for which of the weekends after the 16th?
Let's see.
Which would, so after the weekend of the 16th, I guess that is done. So really that's only leaves the 24th in September.
No, House of Bishops. So if you want bishops, not the 24th.
Not the 24th. Okay, well, I kind of hate to go into October. So
James, I can actually zoom in on the 16th. I can actually zoom. What I said to James is, being a retired person, I go to the beach after Labor Day when it's a third of the price. So I come back on the 15th. I could actually do the 16th.
Or the 17th. We've been doing these on Sundays, so.
Yep, or so whatever the day is, yeah.
17th.
I could do that.
Bishops are clear on the 17th,
Mhm.
at least in terms of House of Bishops.
We are.
17th is it. We'll call it. We'll put it on the schedule right now and spread the word to others. Thank you, everyone. We'll give you a minute back or less than a minute back. And hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And we'll see you out and around.